Hello and welcome. In this talk, I'll be taking you on a journey through a lesser-known theater of World War II, namely the Caribbean. We'll explore the strategic significance, key events, and the lasting impact of the war on this vibrant region. The Battle of the Caribbean refers to a naval campaign that was part of the larger Battle of the Atlantic during World War II. It was at its height from mid-1940 through to the end of 1943. The Battle of the Atlantic pitted U-boats and other warships of the German Navy, known as the Kriegsmarine, against the British Royal Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy, United States Navy, and Allied merchant shipping. Convoys coming mainly from North America and predominantly going to the UK and the Soviet Union were protected for the most part by the British and Canadian navies. Allied losses were 3,500 merchant ships and 175 warships that were sunk in the Atlantic. Germany lost 783 U-boats and 47 surface warships. Why was the Caribbean area so important for the war effort? Essential Allied wartime resources came from the Caribbean area, namely Venezuelan oil fields and refineries, bauxite from British Guyana, and of course the Panama Canal. The Battle of the Caribbean primarily involved German and Italian U-boats against Allied merchant shipping. What is a U-boat? U-boat is an anglicized version of the German word U-boot, a shortening of Unterseeboot, literally undersea boat. Let's get some general background. So why did Germany have so many submarines when the war started? In 1935, Germany negotiated the London Naval Treaty, in which England allowed Germany to increase its navy to a size equal to 1/3 that of the Royal Navy. The agreement was controversial because it allowed Germany to exceed the naval limits imposed by the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. Germany increased its naval size again in 1936, primarily due to the remilitarization of the Rhineland. In March 1936, German troops moved into the Rhineland, a region that had been demilitarized under the Treaty of Versailles. This move was a direct violation of both the Treaty of Versailles and the Locarno treaties. The remilitarization was part of Adolf Hitler's broader strategy to rebuild Germany's military strength and challenge the restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. The international community, particularly Britain and France, did not take significant action in response, which emboldened Hitler to continue his aggressive policies. Hitler agreed with the commander-in-chief of the German Navy, Admiral Erich Raeder, that Germany should embark on a shipbuilding program that would provide for a balanced fleet capable of war with the Royal Navy by 1948. The 1942 Operation Neuland, New Land, was the Kriegsmarine code name for the extension of unrestricted submarine warfare into the Caribbean Sea during World War II. The operation involved 11 German U-boats targeting Allied shipping, particularly oil tankers and bauxite carriers in the Caribbean. The primary targets included the oil refineries on the islands of Aruba, Curacao, and Trinidad, which were crucial for the Allies' petroleum and aluminum supplies. The operation was initially successful, sinking 45 cargo ships and causing significant disruption to Allied supply lines. The U-boats demonstrated their ability to disrupt the British petroleum supplies and United States aluminum supplies, which had not been previously anticipated by Allied pre-war planning. The Italian submarine fleet of World War II was one of the largest in the world at that time. Italian submarines saw action during the war, serving mainly in the Mediterranean. During 1942, Italian submarines operated in the Caribbean Sea as part of the Beta Somme Bordeaux Sommergibel group, which was based in Bordeaux, France. These submarines aimed to disrupt Allied shipping and supply lines in the region. One notable Italian submarine was the Pietro Calvi, which conducted patrols in the Bahamas and the Caribbean. During its patrols, the Calvi sank several Allied ships, including the British ship Tredinick and the American freighter T.C. McCobb. The Calvi also engaged in combat with Allied forces and was eventually sunk by the British after a battle. At the outset of war, the Italian Navy had 107 submarines. During the course of the war, 88 submarines, some two-thirds of its total strength, were destroyed. German U-boats inflicted massive damage on shipping in the Caribbean during 1942 and 1943. By the end of 1942, more than half of the supplies sent to Europe and Africa from the USA were shipped from ports in the Gulf of Mexico. U-boats operating in the Caribbean had sunk 336 ships, at least half of which were oil tankers. The map depicts Allied losses, dark blue being those in 1942, orange for 1943, and light blue for 1944. By the end of 1943, the oil supply was cut off to the East Coast by about 90% due to the effectiveness of the U-boat campaign. Operation Newland peaked in 1942. At the beginning of the war, the U-boats had free rein in the Atlantic, particularly when they attacked in groups known as wolf packs. The photo shows PC-815, a U.S. subchaser that served in World War II. Although the area remained vulnerable to submarines, U-boats never again enjoyed the success resulting from the surprise achieved by the submarines participating in Operation Newland during 1940 to 1942. The Allied forces eventually improved their anti-submarine warfare tactics, driving the Axis submarines out of the Caribbean. So why did the Allies get the upper hand? Improved Allied anti-submarine warfare eventually drove the Axis submarines out of the Caribbean region. The number of British warships was greatly supplemented by the U.S. Lend-Lease program. The creation of the escorted convoy system, with improved radar, sonar, and magnetic detection, and the use of aircraft carriers. Air coverage improved with the development of more U.S. longer-range planes. For some reason, Germany's inability to improve its U-boat capabilities also curtailed its original success. Finally, getting the upper hand was helped along by increased American production of Liberty and other ships, created a greater supply of ships. A Liberty ship was a type of cargo ship built in the United States during World War II. These ships were designed to be mass-produced quickly and inexpensively to support the war effort by transporting troops, military supplies, and other essential goods across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The ships were based on a British design called the Ocean class. They were made from prefabricated sections that were welded together, which sped up the construction process. Going back to our map of the Caribbean, let's discuss that other essential Allied wartime resource, namely the Panama Canal. The most important strategic location in Latin America during World War II was the Panama Canal, which is the gateway between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. The U.S. defended the canal with 189 bombers and 200 fighters, and base submarines at Colon, Panama, and at the submarine base Crown Bay in the U.S. Virgin Islands. There was some speculation that the Japanese would attack the canal, however that never materialized. U.S. Navy Catalinas began patrols along the Lesser Antilles from San Juan, Puerto Rico during September 1939. Facilities were also upgraded at Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba and at Naval Air Station Key West. Another essential Allied wartime resource that was shipped through the Caribbean was bauxite. Bauxite is a sedimentary rock with a relatively high aluminum content. It is the world's main source of aluminum. We asked the question, why was bauxite so important to the USA? It is one of the few strategic raw materials not available in sufficient quantity within the continental United States or Canada. United States military aircraft production depended upon aluminum made from bauxite imported from the Guianas, along shipping routes paralleling the Lesser Antilles. As shown on the map, the marine shipping route used before 1942 was replaced with shipping to New Orleans, and then onward by US and Canadian rail. This was all due to the U-boat campaign. Let's turn our attention to the importance of Saguenay, Quebec, the aluminum industry, and World War II. British Guiana, now Guyana, was the major supplier of high-grade bauxite to Canada during the war years. The aluminum produced in Canada was used by the American military for the production of aircraft. Roughly 2/3 of all Allied aircraft manufactured during the war years used this aluminum. The aluminum refinery was built in the 1930s. During the war, a large hydroelectric complex was built on the Saguenay River at Shipshaw. Lakes and rivers in the Saguenay area were used for their abundance of hydroelectric power. The Saguenay facilities were so prolific that Canada supplied 40% of the Allies' total aluminum production. The Alcoa plant produced thousands of tons of aluminum used for the production of 300 4,000 airplanes during the war. Last but not least of the essential Allied wartime resources in the Caribbean, namely oil, the indispensable resource. During the period 1939 to 1942, the war effort relied on Caribbean oil, primarily from Venezuela. Oil from the Middle East was hampered by the war in the Mediterranean. The oil now had to move round the Cape, or a risky journey through the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean was cut off by the Axis powers, and haulage around the Cape became an onerous task. The bulk of Venezuelan crude was refined at the offshore Dutch islands of Aruba and Curaçao, making them the largest oil refining points in the world at the outbreak of World War II. They reached peak production in the period 1942 to 1943. Britain's petroleum needs required 4 oil tankers of petroleum daily during the early war years, and most of it came from Venezuela through Curaçao after Italy blocked passage through the Mediterranean Sea from the Middle East. The photo shows a T2 oil tanker constructed and produced in large quantities in the US during World War II. Some 533 T2 tankers were built between 1940 and the end of 1945. Let me stress again the importance of the Caribbean to the Allies. The Royal Dutch Shell refinery on Dutch-owned Curaçao, processing 11 million barrels per month, was the largest oil refinery in the world. The refinery at Pointe-à-Pierre on Trinidad was the largest in the British Empire. British troops occupied Aruba, Curaçao, and Bonaire soon after the Netherlands were captured by Nazi Germany. Initially, 120 British soldiers replaced French Marines in July 1940. Later, in September 1940, they were replaced by the 4th Battalion, Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders. In early 1942, these British troops were replaced by over 1,000 American soldiers to further strengthen the defense of the islands. Great Britain based 4 naval air squadrons at Piarco International Airport on Trinidad. During the war, Piarco played a significant role. Originally opened in 1931, the airport was used by the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm No. 1 Observer Training School. In addition, several naval air squadrons were based there until 1945. The United States Army Air Forces, 6th Air Force, and United States Navy air squadrons used the airport for anti-submarine patrols over the southern Caribbean. The airport served as both a transport airfield and a base for these operations. 3 U-boats sailed on 19 January 1942 with orders to simultaneously attack refinery facilities on Curaçao and Trinidad. U-126 sailed on the 2nd of February to patrol the Windward Passage between Cuba and Hispaniola. In coordination with the attack on Willemstad, Curaçao, U-156 moved into Aruba's San Nicolas harbor shortly after midnight on the 16th of February 1942 to torpedo 3 tankers. U-156 withdrew from the harbor as the damaged tankers spilled burning fuel, but returned that evening to shell the refinery. The SS Pennsylvania Sun, an American tanker, was attacked by the German submarine U-571 on July 15, 1942. The attack occurred about 125 miles west of Key West, Florida, in the Gulf of Mexico. The torpedo struck the ship amidships on the port side, causing significant damage and igniting the cargo of Navy fuel oil. The ship's master, Frederick Lyell, steered the vessel southeast at full speed for about 5 minutes before stopping the engines and sending a distress signal. The crew abandoned ship in 3 lifeboats and were later rescued by the USS Dahlgren. Despite the damage, the SS Pennsylvania Sun was towed to Key West for temporary repairs and eventually returned to service in 1943 after permanent repairs were completed. On March 10th, U-161 entered Castries Harbor on St. Lucia to torpedo HMCS Lady Nelson and Umtata. After leaving St. Lucia, U-161 torpedoed and sank the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Acacia with gunfire. U-161 entered Trinidad's Gulf of Paria on 18 February to torpedo the American steam merchant Mokihama and the oil tanker British Consul. So why was the Caribbean so important to the USA? Well, the United States' Gulf of Mexico coastline, including petroleum facilities and Mississippi River trade, could only be defended from the Gulf. There are only 2 ways into the Gulf of Mexico. The U.S. was well positioned to defend the Straits of Florida, however, was less able to prevent access from the Caribbean through the Yucatan Channel. The Big Inch Pipeline is a fascinating piece of history. Built during World War II, it was part of a massive effort to ensure the safe transportation of oil from Texas to the northeastern United States. The Big Inch Pipeline was constructed between 1942 and 1943. It was a massive project spanning 1,254 miles from East Texas to New Jersey. The pipeline was built as an emergency measure to transport crude oil, bypassing the threat posed by German submarines to oil tankers along the East Coast. The pipeline had a diameter of 24 inches and required 28 pumping stations along its route, indicated by circles on the map. Rectangles are storage tank farms. After the war, the pipeline was sold to the Texas East Transmission Corporation in 1947 and converted to transport natural gas, significantly transforming the energy market in the northeastern U.S. The Little Big Inch Pipeline is closely related to the Big Inch Pipeline and was also constructed during the war. This pipeline was also built between 1942 and 1943, just like the Big Inch Pipeline. While the Big Inch transported crude oil, the Little Big Inch was designed to carry refined products such as gasoline, heating oil, diesel oil, and kerosene. The little big inch diameter was 20 inches and required fewer pumping stations compared to the big inch pipeline. It extended from Texas to New Jersey, covering a distance of 1,475 miles. Together, both pipelines were sending about 350,000 barrels of oil a day to the East Coast. The effort was monumental. After the pipelines were completed in 1943, the U.S. oil fields contributed nearly 80% of all production to the war effort. What is truly amazing is that both pipelines were completed and delivering products in just 350 days. The pipelines are still operating today. They were retooled in 1946 to deliver natural gas. Thank you for watching. If you have questions, be sure to leave them in the comments section. To see more fascinating presentations, be sure to press the subscribe button.